Thank you for joining us here at DynamicsCon today. I want to thank all of the sponsors and all the people who've worked on this presentation or this event and putting it together, all the people from Dynamics User Group. It's always a great time to come together with the community and share a little bit about what we've been working on and kind of try to inspire you a little bit with some new ideas and some new ways to use these awesome products. So yeah, thanks for joining us, and thanks for everyone who's been a part of this. And thank you for everyone who voted for this session as well, that got it onto the agenda for us. My name is Keith Sayre. I'm the Power Platform team lead at Inovia Consulting. So I work with Power BI, Power Automate, and Power Apps every day with my team. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of let you know a little bit about me. That's kind of where I'm coming from with this. And you'll see some of my other colleagues throughout the event as well. So that'll be awesome to kind of get to know them as well. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about unlocking the power of Power Automate in Dynamics 365 Business Central. So here's really how this presentation came about is we have a sort of scenario that we run into sometimes when we're working with Dynamics 365 Business Central when you're using Power Automate as well. And that's when you have to cross-reference different items on different tables throughout the system. So here's sort of a scenario, an example scenario to kind of show you what I mean. So say we have a sales order approval process in Power Automate that's based on the customer's balance due as well as their credit limit. So the problem is these fields are not included by default with the workflow documents that come into Power Automate when you use the approval requested Power Automate flow. So in order to get them, we have to cross-reference to the customer table because that's where that data is stored. But the problem is we need the system ID value to do so, and that's not included either with what we get back from that workflow document. So that's sort of the scenario is we're kind of missing this key piece that we need to connect these two different tables within our system and to get our Power Automate flow to work the way that we want it to. So just to kind of illustrate that, I'm going to show you a picture of the get record step within the Business Central Power Automate flow. And as you can see, it's got the standard stuff. You pick your environment, your company name, your API category, the table that you're after, which is in this case the customers. But here's the thing: is the very bottom it requires the row ID, and that's a very specific reference to a specific record within the system. So it's the same thing as the system ID within Business Central, which is an internal value that is rarely used by the users. So when you're trying to build a flow, that's kind of the problem, right? Is we need that number in order to get the customer record and then get all those fields that we want to work with. So that's really our scenario that we're working with, and what prompted this session idea is to kind of solve this problem. So I wonder if you've run into that before. So feel free to jump in the chat. I'll be around during this session. And let us know if you've encountered something similar when you've been working with Power Automate. So our agenda today is we're gonna do three different things. We're gonna take a look at the Azure App Registration. We're not gonna go into super detail about that, but then we're gonna be talking about how you build the flow, and then how to use that HTTP connector to cross-reference the objects. That's sort of the key. That's the solution to the scenario that we just talked through. So let's start at the beginning. Before you can do any of this, you do need to register an app within Azure. We're not gonna go into it step by step just because there's not enough time for that. But there are a lot of tutorials out there about how to set these things up. But basically, the steps are: first, you need to register your app within Azure. So you can start at portal.azure.com. You go into Active Directory, set up your app registration. It gives you the client ID. All kinds of things like that you need to just kind of keep and record for later. So the client ID, the tenant ID, all those important numbers you're going to need to plug in just a little bit. You're going to need to set the permissions for that app for Business Central. You're going to need to give it basically all the delegated and app permissions just to make sure that it can do what it needs to do. And then to authenticate, you'll create a secret, and you'll put that into your notepad as well. Now that's very important to record it now, because the next time you come back to that screen, it's not going to show it anymore. So you would have to create a new one if that's the case. So make sure you record that that secret. Here's just some screens that kind of show on a broad sense how that all comes together. So what we're looking at is the home screen for an app that's been configured to access Business Central. And as you can see, it's got the client ID, object ID, directory ID. That's the tenant ID. All those things are important. So just plop them all in a notepad, as well as your secret, once we get to that point as well. Here's how the configurations work. If you don't see Business Central on the list already, click that add a permission and find it there. And then you want to give it all these permissions. And then you need to click that green check marks to grant admin consent for it. If you're not an admin, you'll need an admin user to do that for you. Finally, this is how the secret screen works. It's really very simple. All you have to do is click add, say how long you want it to last for, and then give it a name, and then it generates a string. You can see I've got it crossed out there on the screenshot, but you want to copy that and put it into your notepad, because you're going to need that to authenticate when you do your call from Power Automate. One last step for the configuration, we have to go into Business Central. You want to search for Azure Active Directory Applications, click New. You want to set the client ID to match the app ID from your Active Directory. That's one of the numbers that we just recorded. And then you need to add permissions for that app. So basically, they need to have permissions for any of the tables you're going to be accessing within Business Central. So a lot of the standard permission sets will work out just fine. Just kind of consult what you're trying to get, and then get the permission set that makes sense for it. Here's an example of how that ends up working once you've got it all set up within Business Central. So now we're gonna go ahead and move over to Power Automate Flow, and I'm going to walk you through the flow that we used in this case, so you can see how it all comes together. All right, so here is the flow that we've generated for this example, and you can kind of follow along with it and kind of rebuild it as you go when you're building one for yourself. So again, our scenario is a sales order approval. So our first step is a simple when a sales document approval is requested step. This is one that's included within the standard templates. It's a fairly standard opener, a trigger for Power Automate. Then we get the record. Again, this particular document, it's using the workflow sales documents table. It's going to pull the one that triggered this whole flow. And now we've got all the fields that are relevant to that record within Power Automate, and we can use them for our next steps. So here's the special step that we need to get all of this to work together. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So to add this step, you want to add a step that's called the HTTP step, and you'll see it. It looks just like that. And then to configure this, we need to do a specific type of URI. As you can see, it's in this format with Business Central. So you have api.businesscentral.dynamics.com /v2.0, and then this is our tenant ID, so that you would replace that with your tenant ID. The environment we want is called production in this case. Then we go API every time, and then the category is v2.0 in this case. If you're using a custom API, these may be different, but we are using, in this case, the Microsoft APIs v2.0. So now we do 2.0. Now we do a company's call, right? And in the parentheses, this is actually the ID of the company that we want to be using. So it's the same as this one here, the Cronus USA Inc. And then finally, what we're actually calling is the customer's API. So that's the last step. So hopefully that all kind of made sense, the little building blocks of that URI. So as you're building one for yourself, just kind of take out the tenant ID and put in yours. put in the environment that you want to use if it's not production, change the categories if you're in a different category, just any of those kind of things. But if you want to go to customers, this particular format will do it for you. So that's kind of cool, is that basically all you would need to do is change the tenant ID and the company ID, and this would work for you within Business Central SaaS. All right, and then so the next part of this is where we're getting to the specific customer that we want to get information from. So we're going to add this under queries. You're going to put this $ filter, because what we're doing is we're going to add a filter to our query. And then we need to reference a field within the API. So in this case, the API uses a field called number. Sometimes those are NO, just depending on who put it together. But in this case, number is the one that we're looking for. And then you do space EQ and then space. And this is very important to put these single quotes in here. And what we've done basically, and I can redo it here just so you can see how it works, is we do number EQ, and then we've got single quote. Between those, we're just going to put a dynamic content piece for our bill to customer know. So what that represents is the customer number for the order that we're working with for our approval. So that's kind of cool. So now what this is going to do is when this thing fires, it's going to get a list of all the customers from that company, but it's going to filter it down to where number equals the bill to customer number. So there should only be one, because the bill to customer number should not be duplicated. So now we're cross-referencing our tables, right? So we've kind of got most of what we're doing done. So with authentication, here's how you want to set this up. You want to go to the authentication type is Active Directory. You want to use login.windows.net as your authority. Tenant is going to be your tenant ID. You recorded that earlier. Audience is going to be api.businesscentral.dynamics.com. Client ID is again your app ID. Remember, you recorded that earlier. And then under here, you want to select your credential type as secret. And then down here, you're going to paste that secret. I'm not going to show you mine because it's a secret, but you want to paste yours down in there, and then that'll let you authenticate here. So there's a couple more steps that we have to do to make sure this thing works out properly. And the reason why is because technically when this thing fires, it's going to think that what it's returning is multiple records, because that's how we kind of structured the call, but we're filtering it down to where there's only one. So we need to kind of nudge it a little bit to get it to understand what we're doing. So the very next step that we want to do when we build this thing is we want to add a compose step. That's just a standard step where you just kind of throw something into it and it makes something that you can reference later. You want to create a compose step for the body. And at this point, you actually want to test your flow. So you want to save it, go into Business Central, request an approval, right? Because what happens is then you have a run of your flow. And I can show you how that ends up happening with one of these successful ones. So once you have the flow run, it's going to output what that call is producing, right, in this compose step. And what you do is you just hit show raw outputs. And look at that. That is one record that matches the flow that we just ran. So what I did there is I show raw output. I'm going to select it all and copy, because I'm going to need that. And I'll show you where I put it. So go back to the edit screen. The next step we're going to add is a step called parse JSON. The content is again the body from that HTTP step. Here's what you do is you do generate from sample, and then you just paste what we just copied. All right. So what that does is it's gonna take that output and say, and kind of work backwards and tell us, okay, so this is the schema that is using, and it's generated our schema for us. Now we can reference any of those individual values. But again, they're in an array, right? It thinks there's multiples, or there could be multiples, right? So here's sort of a workaround for that within Power Automate is you can initialize a variable. We're going to call our system ID. It's going to be an array. And then what we're going to do is come down to the next step here. And I think it's this one, because I'm actually doing a couple of different things to show you a couple of different solutions here. So now we do an apply to each step for the append to array variable. And we're going to append to the system array from the, I'll take it out so you can see what that looks like. So this is from our parse JSON. There's a field called ID. So what this does now is when this thing runs, for every ID that came back, it's going to put it into a new variable for us. It should only be one though, which is great. All right, so then what we can do, come down here, we've got another compose step. And what I did is I inserted an expression. In this case, I just said first, which just grabs the first value within a set, first from our variable systemId. So that isolates a single value that represents the systemId of the customer, which lets us do now this: get customer, production, Cronus, V2, customers, output from there. So we have a single record now. We've got a single customer thing coming back. And now we have all those values that we can work with. So we can do credit limit, we can do some math, we can do some balance due stuff. You can also, you don't really have to do that in some cases. Well, in this particular case, we could just do what I've done here is I've created another variable for credit limit, another one for balance due, and I've done the very same thing that I did with systemId, just with the credit limit. So I'm appending to array for balance due from the balance due. I'm appending to array for credit limit for the credit limit, and then I'm creating the final one, which is just the first credit limit and the first balance due. And now I've got those values isolated too. I don't really have to do this step, but this is a little bit easier to follow, I think. But if you feel like you can do it this way, by all means, why not? So now we got a condition to where our if the balance due is greater than the credit limit, it's going to go over here and start an approval process. If that is not the case, it's going to go ahead and approve that within Business Central. Because this particular use case is saying if that's not true, we don't have to approve it. It can just go through. So that's how that all kind of comes together. And then we can just kind of run one real quick just to show you what's going on. So I got this order right here. I'm just going to request an approval. And in this case, this customer should have a value, a balance due that's over their credit limit. You can see that it's running its snaps right now. And if we come down here, we'll see it doing its logic. And there it is, our approval process. So we can go ahead and approve that, and it's going to send it back to Business Central, just like normal with we do with these approvals. But yeah, that's essentially what this is all about. And yeah, I do want to thank you again for being a part of this presentation. I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions at the end, because I think there's a lot of cool potential and cool ideas that this can prompt for people. It's certainly done it for us when we're working with Power Automate and Business Central. So using this schema, this example, I think you're going to be able to do some really cool stuff with Power Automate and Business Central, just because this gives you so much power to say, okay, I've got something that happened over here. Let's now reach out over here. And it's overcoming that central problem that we talked about at the beginning, that need for the systemId. So again, feel free to put your questions. I'll be here to answer those.
Hey, DynamicsCon, and thanks for joining the presentation today. Happy to be here to answer any questions that have come up as a result of the presentation, or just any other questions in general. So yeah, it's a cool event. Love to engage with the community. Looks like we've got a question in from Heidi. She says, would it be possible to build something in a similar manner when you want to trigger a flow by just one field change versus the whole record changing? So far I've actually tried to do something with this, and I've so far been unsuccessful. Um, so the trick is that the flow, it doesn't really the trigger step, from what I can tell, it doesn't include enough fields for me to apply the filters that I want for those kind of things. So it's certainly possible if you have a very targeted custom API, but with the base stuff, it's going to be really challenging. The fields are just not at present. They're not being sent that we could run a filter on. So my workaround for that is usually just pull all the record in, run a filter. If it doesn't meet my parameters, then it's going to be a canceled flow. But that's a great question, and it's a problem that we're trying to address from our side for sure. So yeah, if there are any other questions, just throw them in the chat box, and we'll talk it through. Otherwise, I'll kind of just think about some of the things that I've been thinking about with this since I recorded the presentation. Just spend a little bit. Um, so yeah, one of the cool things that we've done too with those credit limits that I demonstrated was instead of just doing a straight um, is balance due greater than the credit limit, we've also done some things where we've said, okay, so can we divide the balance by the credit limit and then run a conditional based on whether the customer is within a certain percent of their credit limit? We've done that kind of thing too. So that's cool. You just add some expressions in there to evaluate that. So that's another filter that we run into. The flow HTTP step cannot use a gateway to call an API that is not publicly exposed. I believe that that is possible. We haven't done that so far, just because we've been mostly focused on BC SaaS. But from my understanding, the gateways that you can set up with the Power Platform are accessible through uh, the different products like Power Automate. If not, I'm almost certain that if you do a custom connector in Power Automate, you can do that for sure. But that's a great question as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that would be useful for you to know based on that, or any additional insights. So like I mentioned too, I think I mentioned this. If I didn't, I'll make it clear now. So you can use the standard APIs that are part of Business Central SaaS with that. That's what we demonstrated. But it does work with any custom APIs as well. If you've coded one, or if you've had a Microsoft partner put one in for you. That's cool if you want to access any kind of objects that are not standard with those. So some of the things we worked with are things like jobs and service orders that don't have um, a specific standard API in place. So we've been able to run a custom one and do similar results with that, calling it through the HTTP connector. Let's see. So we got a question regarding flow and mail merge related to having about 150 customers and a credit value per month from an export from BC. Think of word mail merge, but an email. Each email to only their own email, if it's possible. Fine, but this would be very useful. Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. So if you're pulling in a list of your customers with their emails, with their credit value per month, and you've got all that's pulling in from BC. So what you can do with that is do an apply to each for each row, and have it send an email to the customer email that's on that row with the details in there. You can put them in as dynamic values that way. So apply to each is a pretty cool feature for doing that, because each one will send a separate email, and it'll be from whichever email account that you've authenticated with Power Automate. So yeah, definitely. I think based on what I'm understanding of your problem, that's how I would approach it. Is take a look at that apply to each condition. I'm sorry, it's not a condition. Apply to each feature within Power Automate, and then you'll be able to make the template and then have it apply to the whole list. But that's a great question, an interesting idea, and I hope it works for you that way. I think that approach would do it. Any other questions we have along the way? We've got a few more minutes to talk together. It's always fun to engage with people about this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm trying to think too if there's anything else I should mention to you with that has come up since then. Um, oh, one thing that to keep in mind is that the Azure um, the Azure settings for your connection to Business Central are per environment settings. So if you're going to move from like a sandbox to a production, before you do that, make sure that you've set your permissions up in the production as well. Just as an FYI, it's per environment for those permissions within BC. So yeah, and yeah, Deborah says that would be great for marketing emails, and I totally agree. Marketing is my background as well, and it's kind of what got me into this. And Power Automate is a tool. As a tool, um, we use a lot on the finance side. We use a lot on the operational side, but I think there's a lot of potential in the marketing side and sales side as well for different applications like what you're talking about, and you could target things, get things out a certain way, have things that are based on triggers, just all kinds of cool stuff. So thanks for that observation. That's an important thing too. Yeah, so yeah, I really enjoyed kind of putting this together for you, and I submitted the idea just because again it was something that we ran into that we needed to solve, and other people um, I thought other people would have run into the same problem. And it sounds like from based on the chat that's the case. So hopefully this process will help you out in solving that dilemma and getting your flows moving again. Um, so yeah, and yeah, I think that as far as that goes, do we have any other questions that anyone would like to raise at this time? Could be about anything. I was on the previous session as well. If you have anything from that you still have to talk about. And again, if you want to talk to me, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or anything like that. I think it's linked into my profile on the DynamicsCon. So happy to connect with you and talk through anything related to Power Automate or Power BI or Power Apps, any of that. Um, I'm learning Business Central myself, just as sort of being introduced to it through the Power Platform, but maybe some questions about that too, if you have them along the way. So all right, well, yeah, it's been fun to. Do I have this document to share? I don't have are you referring to the flow itself? I don't have the actual flow to share, but I do know that the presentation is available after the event at DynamicsCon. And I think that I have quite a few screenshots in there as well. And I know these videos are available afterwards, so you can always review as well. But I don't have the file itself to share just yet, or at this time. But thanks for asking about that. But yeah, thanks again to all the DynamicsCon staff, and we really appreciate the chance to share with you today, and hope you enjoy the rest of the event.